The evening sun dips lower over the horizon, casting a golden hue over the streets of Red Hollow, a small American town nestled amid silos and fields. On any other day, you could hear the faint laughter of children or the chatter of folks sitting on their porches, sipping sweet tea. But today is different, unsettlingly quiet, save for the faint shattering of normality taking place at Main Street's busy intersection. From a small rust-covered truck emerges a man, his leg encased in a brace, moving cautiously as he leans heavily on a cane. His name is Emery, a factory worker with weary eyes that have seen too many long shifts and not nearly enough kind mornings. Just as he pushes the light button to cross the street, a commanding voice booms across the pavement. "Move it, Cripple!" Heads turn. The words slice through the air, vile and unmistakable. Their source, a heavy-set patrol officer with mirrored sunglasses. Behind him, an idling police cruiser hums menacingly. He taps the squad car as if punctuating his demand and gestures impatiently. Emery's head lowers slightly, a flicker of shame almost imperceptible to anyone not paying attention. But someone is. Across the street, outside the corner diner, a group of bikers dismount their Harleys, denim jackets catching the last rays of sunlight. The roar of their engines has just faded into distant rumblings when the officer's shout freezes a young mother pushing a stroller and causes a shopkeeper stepping outside to pause mid-step. No one dares move toward the scene. No one, except them. Shua rider Cole, the leader of the Crescent Pack bikers, stands tall. His intimidating frame is a sharp contrast to his calm demeanor. His hand clenches his helmet tightly as he looks toward his group, a collection of tough exterior men and women who shield their own histories of battles. Veterans, social activists, wanderers. They are bonded by a singular, unbreakable philosophy, a disdain for intolerance. "Stay," Ryder says simply to the others, before crossing the street. His boots echo off the asphalt with every deliberate step, and something in his gaze now grabs the attention of everyone else watching. Confidence without aggression, resolve without rage. "What's going on here?" Ryder's voice is steady and firm when he speaks to the officer, but it lacks the sharp edge the officer had wielded moments earlier. "Mind your business," the officer fires back, his hand twitching near his belt. "This is official authority handling unruly behavior." "Unruly?" Ryder points toward Emery, who has yet to respond, paralyzed by humiliation that seems to roll off him in waves. "He was crossing the street." The officer narrows his eyes. "He's capable of walking faster. Told him to move it. Didn't think I needed to explain myself to some biker." His tone drips with disdain. The gathered crowd expands cautiously, their faces betraying a tense mix of curiosity and fear as the scene unfolds. Behind Ryder, a rumble breaks the uneasy silence. One by one, the other bikers fire up their bikes. The sound fills the streets, drowning out the murmurs from the small crowd. The 98 engines seem to speak collectively. "We see, we hear, we act." "Oh, really?" the officer mutters as though attempting humor. "What is this, intimidation?" He forces a dry, nervous chuckle. "It's unity," a deep female voice cuts in. Ryder's second-in-command, Lena, steps forward, removing her helmet to reveal piercing green eyes under cropped jet-black hair. "And it's a reckoning," she adds solemnly. Meanwhile, Emery looks up at Ryder, then the others behind him. His expression is hard to read, perhaps disbelief, perhaps gratitude, but definitely not fear. In this moment, he feels seen for the first time in what must have been years. The officer makes the fatal error of stepping toe-to-toe with Ryder. "You think you can ignore authority?" The words sputter furiously as his control ebbs away. "We don't," Ryder responds calmly, but the slight tightening of his jaw matches the measured cadence of his words. "But what's happening right now isn't about authority. This is about abuse of it. There's a difference." More audacious citizens have drifted closer now, forming a half-moon around the growing confrontation. Bystanders whisper among themselves, their conversations oscillating between admiration for the bikers' bravery and apprehension about the unfolding outcome. "You get out of line with me and there will be consequences," the officer warns. His radio crackles to life on his shoulder. A dispatcher's voice commands attention with a code 10-something or other, but he ignores it. "Better take that," Lena quips with an arched eyebrow. Inside the diner, a teen captures the scene on their phone, live streaming to a growing audience. Viewers pour in by the second, demanding to know what's happening, emotions ranging from outrage to support. Back at the center of it all, Ryder's patience reaches its end. "Listen," Ryder growls, his tone darker now. He lightly pushes the officer back, just enough for space, and gestures to Emery. I don't know what made you hate someone who hasn't wronged you, but that man did nothing but exist in your way. And if you don't get the difference now, you're going to make things worse for yourself. Every bike shudders with a low idle that mirrors the thrumming power of words left unspoken, the group's unity needing no further emphasis. Several in the crowd clap hesitantly, someone cheers. Emery himself steps forward slightly, newfound courage emerging from the collective shield of the Crescent Pack's protective circle of motors. Before the tension can unravel completely, a piercing siren cries in the distance. Half a block down, another cruiser screeches into view. Two officers bolt from their vehicle, hands already resting over the holsters of their firearms. The significance of their intent cannot be missed. "He called backup?" Lena hisses under her breath, but loudly enough to be overheard. The crowd recoils with sharp intakes of breath. Ryder doesn't flinch. Instead, his eyes scan the approaching duo, calculating before turning back to his group. "Everybody stay calm!" Ryder raises a hand as if steadying their collective resolve. "We're not raising fists unless they do first. Got it?" Lena nods automatically. The rest follow, head inclines, subtle gestures acknowledging the command. They fall still like statues, powerful and unwavering. In the swirling chaos of dust, sirens, and the relentless gaze of an unblinking camera lens, the second officer steps out. His demeanor is noticeably stricter, not like his colleagues' fiery bluffs, but far colder. "You people better explain yourselves," this one says. The situation seems primed to spiral uncontrollably. Somewhere, someone yells, "They didn't do anything." It was that first officer harassing the disabled guy. But the cops don't listen. Their cavalier dismissal of the voices fuels the crowd's resentment. Emery finally musters his voice, shaky but defiant in this crucial moment. These 99 people stop for me," he says haltingly, then louder, "when nobody else would. Isn't that what respect looks like?" The air hangs heavy. Tension weighs down on every second as if the laws of nature themselves are bracing for eruption. And then, the officer's hand grips his radio again. The sound before him, improbable yet happens. One distinct thud of leather boots nearing from the blockside shadows. Joshua Ryder leans closer, whispering unshakably near Cliff, "Keep witnessing." Built-to quality clean sharks. Supporters are gathered, cameras now rolling. The evening vibrates with an intensity that feels almost tangible. The standoff in Red Hollow is no longer just a small-town incident. It has become a spectacle that resonates with an unmistakable tension. The sirens from the second cruiser wail hauntingly, and the faint breeze does little to relieve the heat or emotions boiling over in the street. Every pair of eyes is locked on the bikers and the officers, including the young officer who had just stepped out of his cruiser. Unlike his partner, this officer moves with a different energy. His almost impassive detachment belies a more calculated demeanor. He surveys the scene, taking in the resolute Crescent Pack, the growing crowd, and the lone man still clutching his cane amid it all. His voice cuts through the noise, precise and deliberate. "This is getting out of hand," the second officer says, his tone cool as he adjusts his belt. His eyes flicker to the first officer, the one who lit the match that ignited the tense standoff, and then to the man leading the bikers with a commanding presence. Ryder doesn't hesitate. Standing firm, he responds evenly. It was out of hand the moment he chose to humiliate a man who didn't deserve it. For a fraction of a second, something almost imperceptible flits across the second officer's face, recognition or perhaps even understanding. Still, his expression remains unreadable as he steps closer to Ryder, stopping just a few paces away. The silence between them feels electric, humming with unspoken tension. "You think you're helping here?" he asks, tilting his head slightly, almost as if to challenge. "I don't think," Ryder replies. "I know." He lets the words hang in the air, charged with conviction. Behind him, Lena watches closely, her sharp green eyes locked onto every subtle movement. She can sense the shift, the way the second officer measures his words and actions more carefully than his hot-headed partner. Still, her instincts scream at her to stay on alert. She knows too well how quickly situations like this can spiral out of control. Meanwhile, the first officer, emboldened by his colleague's arrival but still seething from the earlier defiance, takes a step forward, gesturing wildly at the bikers. "They're obstructing justice, refusing to disperse. This is a clear violation." Enough, the second officer interjects, cutting him off mid-rant. His voice isn't loud, but it carries weight. The first officer freezes, his mouth snapping shut in surprise. The crowd murmurs at the exchange, their whispers mingling with the low rumble of the idling motorcycles. The young mother with the stroller takes a half-step forward, her face a mix of fear and determination. Across the street, the teenager inside the diner is still live-streaming, their phone capturing every charged moment as the number of viewers climbs steadily into the thousands. Emery, still standing at the center of it all, grips his cane tighter. The humiliation he felt earlier has begun to ebb, replaced by a flicker of something unfamiliar: pride. For once, someone stood up for him. For once, he wasn't invisible. The second officer sighs, his hand resting on his radio but not reaching for his weapon. He glances at Ryder, then at the bikers behind him. "This isn't how we solve things," he says, his tone almost resigned. "No," Ryder agrees, "it's not. But it's how we stop them from getting worse." The two men lock eyes, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Before the second officer can respond, however, a voice from the crowd pierces the tension. "This isn't right!" The shopkeeper who had paused on the sidewalk earlier steps forward, his face red with anger. He points a finger at the officers. "That man didn't do anything wrong. And these people," he gestures to the bikers, "are just standing up for what's right." His words ripple through the crowd like a spark catching kindling. Others begin to voice their agreement, their previously hushed whispers growing louder. "Yeah," someone shouts. "Leave them alone," another adds. The once passive bystanders are finding their voices, their courage bolstered by the Crescent Pack's unwavering example. The first officer turns to the crowd, his face a mask of frustration. "All of you, disperse immediately. This is an unlawful assembly." His hand hovers near his holster as his voice rises, desperate to regain control. But the crowd doesn't move. If anything, they edge closer, their collective presence a silent act of defiance. The bikers remain still, their engines rumbling like a heartbeat, steady and unyielding. The second officer exhales slowly, realizing the gravity of the situation. He looks at Ryder once more, his gaze firm. "If this escalates, it won't end well for anyone," he warns. "You know that." Ryder doesn't flinch. His voice is calm but resolute as he replies, "Then don't let it escalate." For a moment, it seems like the second officer might be considering his words. But before he can act, the first officer takes a step closer to Ryder, his face twisted with rage. "You think you're some kind of hero?" he snarls. "You think you can just roll into town and make a mockery of the police?" Ryder meets his glare without hesitation. "I think heroes do what's right, even when it's hard, and I think you've forgotten what that means." The words hit like a punch, and the first officer's hand drops to his sidearm instinctively. Gasps ripple through the crowd at the sudden movement, tension snapping taut like a wire about to break. "Don't!" Lena's voice cuts through the chaos, sharp and commanding. She takes a step forward, her hands raised in a gesture of peace, but her eyes are blazing. "Whatever you're thinking, don't!" The second officer moves quickly, placing a hand on his partner's shoulder. "Stand down," he orders firmly. The first officer hesitates, his hand trembling slightly, before finally backing off. The collective exhale from the crowd is almost audible. In the thick, charged silence that follows, a new sound emerges, distant but unmistakable. The heavy rumble of more motorcycles approaching, growing louder with each passing second. Heads turn toward the source, and soon enough, a line of bikers comes into view, their headlights cutting through the twilight. The Crescent Pack doesn't react visibly, but there's a palpable shift in the atmosphere. These newcomers wear no patches, no identifiable insignia. They're an unknown quantity, and their arrival only adds another layer of tension to an already volatile situation. The lead biker pulls up beside Ryder, cutting his engine and flipping up his visor. His face is weathered, his eyes sharp and assessing. He looks at Ryder, then at the officers, before speaking. "Trouble? Depends," Ryder replies evenly. "What brings you here?" The man smirks faintly. "Saw the live stream. Figured you could use some backup." Ryder's expression remains neutral, but there's a flicker of acknowledgement in his eyes. He nods once, a silent agreement. The presence of the newcomers seems to unsettle the officers further. The first officer steps back, his hand still twitching near his holster, while the second officer casts a wary glance at the growing number of bikes lining the street. The crowd, emboldened by the display of solidarity, begins to chant softly, "Justice? Justice? Justice?" The word grows louder with each repetition, a rhythmic call that reverberates through the air like a drumbeat. Emery, standing at the center of it all, feels a lump rise in his throat. He looks at Ryder, then at the bikers, and finally at the crowd. For the first time in years, he feels something he thought he'd lost: hope. The chanting reaches a crescendo, and the second officer finally speaks, his voice cutting through the noise. Enough! He raises his hands, trying to regain control. Everyone, stand down. We're not here to start a riot. Ryder steps forward, his presence commanding as he addresses the crowd. You've made your voices heard, he says, his deep voice carrying over the commotion. Now let's show them we're better than this. No violence, no chaos, just unity. The crowd begins to quiet, the chants fading into an expectant hush. The second officer looks at Ryder, his expression unreadable, before finally nodding. Let's de-escalate, he says, his tone almost resigned. But as the crowd begins to disperse, a sudden shout pierces the air. Hey, over here! All eyes turn to the diner, where the teenager with the live stream is pointing towards something or someone just out of view. The tension snaps back into place like a taut rubber band as the scene takes a new, unexpected turn. Recap. The confrontation escalates as more parties join the standoff, including a mysterious group of bikers responding to the livestream. Just as tensions seem to de-escalate, a sudden distraction shifts everyone's focus, leaving the outcome hanging precariously in the balance. The golden glow of the setting sun fades further into twilight. Where the Crescent Pack bikers had once stood solitary as lions, they now exist among roaring tension and echoes of their own resolve. Justice, courage, unity. These words hang in the thickening evening air. They were meant to be the defenders, but even lions grow wary when the hyenas multiply in the dark. The distraction from the diner pulls the gaze of every onlooker. A wiry man, his clothes disheveled and his eyes darting nervously, emerges from behind a nearby building. His hands are raised, palms out toward the crowd. He moves hastily, his body language screaming urgency, though it's unclear whether his intention is to help or harm. Officer! The man calls out, his voice cracking. He points to the first officer, the hot-headed one who had first escalated the encounter with Emery. You need to listen to me. The officer bristles, his hand twitching toward his holster again. Who are you and what do you want? He snaps. There's something you need to know. The man glances nervously toward the Crescent Pack, then at the live-streaming teen, whose camera lens seems to strip him of every ounce of composure. Two saw what happened earlier. The crowd grows silent again, the only sounds remaining the rumble of idling bikes and the faint cry of cicadas in the distance. The first officer narrows his eyes, suspicion radiating from him. Spit it out, he demands. I saw you push that guy, the man blurts, pointing directly at the first officer. His words hit the street like a grenade, sending shockwaves through the crowd. Ryder's piercing gaze locks onto the officer, who stiffens immediately. Lena shifts to stand beside her leader, her expression a mix of satisfaction and caution. Is this true? She asks, her voice cutting clear through the murmur of the bystanders. That's a lie, the first officer shouts, his voice rising as his composure crumbles. This guy's clearly confused or, I'm not lying, the man interrupts, trembling but resolute. I saw you shove him on the crosswalk before you started yelling. The guy couldn't even keep his balance. Emery looks up sharply at this revelation, his face pale but his eyes flashing with something akin to hope. He clutches his cane tighter, taking an uneasy step forward. Is that true? He asks quietly, though his voice carries in the hush of the moment. Did you push me? The first officer looks flustered, his mouth opening and closing as he struggles to find a response. The second officer watches him closely, suspicion darkening his features. Coleman, he says sharply, addressing his partner, is there any truth to this? I didn't push anyone, the first officer Coleman barks, but the unease in his voice betrays him, and the crowd seems to sense it. Whispers ripple through the onlookers, some murmuring disbelief, others anger. Plenty of us were here, Ryder says, stepping forward. His towering presence demands attention. And now that someone said it, maybe a few others will find their backbone and confirm it. His words act as a catalyst. A young woman steps forward hesitantly from the edge of the crowd. Her hands tremble, but her voice, while quiet, is firm. I think I saw it too, she says. I didn't want to say anything before, but I think he did shove the man. The tension spikes anew, the air thick with the weight of unfolding truth. Coleman's face flushes red, the vein in his temple pulsing visibly. He takes a step back, but his hand hovers dangerously close to his weapon. "This is ridiculous," he growls. "None of you know what you're talking about." The second officer steps between Coleman and the crowd, his stance one of authority but also restraint. "That's enough," he says, his tone clipped. "We'll address these accusations properly, but for now, stand down." For a moment, it seems as though Coleman might refuse. His hand twitches, his breathing rapid and shallow. But then his eyes dart toward the other bikers, nearly 100 strong, their stance unified and unyielding. The weight of their collective gaze bears down on him, and he relents, lowering his hand and stepping back. The second officer exhales slowly and turns toward the crowd. "If anyone has credible evidence or testimony, we'll need to process it through the proper channels," he says. "But this," he gestures to the standoff, "isn't the way to handle it." "You mean it's not the way you want us to handle it?" Lena says sharply. Her green eyes glitter with defiance and her words strike like a whip. "Because handling it your way means nothing happens. It means people like him," she nods toward Emery, "keep getting trampled while people like your partner get a pass." The crowd murmurs in agreement, their voices growing bolder. Meanwhile, the teen in the diner angles their phone to capture Lena's impassioned words, their live stream comments exploding with support for the bikers and condemnation for the officers. The second officer holds up his hands in a placating gesture. "I understand your frustrations," he says, "but escalating this further doesn't help anyone." "What helps then?" Ryder asks, his voice low but cutting. "Letting people like him abuse their position until someone gets hurt or worse?" The crowd hangs on to his every word, their collective tension palpable. This isn't about frustration or anger, it's about justice. A hush falls over the street, Ryder's words resonating deeply. Even the second officer seems momentarily struck by their truth. But before he can respond, the distant sound of more approaching vehicles cuts through the evening air. The flashing lights of additional police cruisers become visible on the horizon, their wailing sirens growing louder with each passing second. Lena's eyes narrow and she steps closer to Ryder. "We need to make a decision," she says quietly. "If they come in force, this could get out of control fast." Ryder nods, his mind working quickly. He looks out at the crowd, then at his pack, and finally at the approaching cruisers. "We're not here to fight," he says firmly, addressing his bikers. "We're here to stand, and we're not moving unless they force us." The Crescent Pack responds with quiet determination, their stances unwavering. Lena steps back to relay Ryder's directive to the others, her voice calm but authoritative. Meanwhile, the crowd begins to shift uneasily, the weight of the approaching reinforcements pressing down on them. As the new police arrivals pull onto the street, the first cruiser brakes hard, its tires skimming the asphalt. More officers step out, their expressions a mix of confusion and irritation as they take in the scene. "What's going on here?" one of them demands, addressing the second officer. His gaze sweeps over the tense standoff, the simmering crowd, and the bikers who remain resolute. "We've got a situation," the second officer says, his voice steady but strained. "An officer involved in an incident and a group that's protesting." "Protesting?" Coleman snarls, his fury bubbling back to the surface. "They're obstructing justice and inciting chaos. That's what they're doing." The newly arrived officers exchange uncertain looks, clearly caught off guard by the intensity of the scene. One of them approaches Coleman, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "Coleman, take a walk. Cool off," he advises. But Coleman shakes him off, his anger boiling over. "This is my jurisdiction," he shouts, "and I'm not backing down." The outburst sends ripples through the crowd once more, their murmurs growing louder. But it's a single, piercing voice that cuts through the noise, a voice that is both steady and resolute. "Back down, officer," Emery says, his tone surprisingly firm for someone who had seemed so timid just hours before. He steps forward, his cane steadying him as he moves toward the epicenter of the confrontation. "You already pushed me once. You won't do it again." The declaration stuns everyone into silence, even Coleman. Emery's gaze is steady, his voice unwavering despite the weight of the moment. The tide of power shifts subtly but unmistakably, and for the first time, it feels as though the scales are beginning to balance. The second officer looks at Emery, his expression softening slightly. He turns to Coleman, his voice firm but measured. "Enough," he says. "You've done more harm than good tonight. It's time to let it go." For a moment, it seems as though Coleman might resist. His jaw tenses and his hand twitches toward his sidearm, but then he sees the faces staring back at him. The crowd, the bikers, even some of his fellow officers, and the fight seems to drain out of him. With a frustrated growl, he turns and stalks back toward his cruiser. The atmosphere shifts slightly, the tension easing but not dissipating entirely. The second officer looks at Ryder, then at Emery. "This isn't over," he says quietly. "But tonight, I think it's time we all step back." Ryder nods, his expression unreadable. "Agreed," he says. "But remember, we'll be watching." His words are a promise, not a threat, and the second officer seems to understand this. As the bikers begin to power down their engines, the crowd slowly starts to disperse, but the sense of unity and defiance lingers, etched into the fabric of Red Hollow's streets like an unyielding anthem. Emery stands a little taller, his grip on his cane steady, his expression one of quiet triumph. The biker who had arrived with backup earlier approaches Ryder, his smirk replaced by a look of genuine respect. "You handled that well," he says, his voice low. "I've seen too many of these go the other way." Ryder nods but doesn't respond. His gaze remains fixed on the departing cruisers, his thoughts unreadable. The evening air is thick with unspoken words, but one thing is clear. This isn't the end of the story. It's only the beginning. Recap. The tension reaches a boiling point as accusations against the first officer emerge, sparking outrage among the crowd. As backup arrives and emotions flare, Emery steps forward with newfound courage, forcing a temporary de-escalation. The night ends with uncertainty, but also a glimmer of hope for justice. Night deepens, but the air in Red Hollow is far from calm. The Crescent Pack's bikes grow silent as they idly glare at approaching police cruisers, their steel exteriors glinting under the pale glow of the streetlights. The previously swelling cries for justice have softened, now replaced by a low murmur of worry shared among the gathered townspeople. The standoff seems to teeter on the edge of chaos, precariously balanced between action and hesitation. As the new officers move closer, the questions hover thick over the scene. Who will take the next step? Will the flame of courage spread or be doused? Ryder stands motionless at the forefront, his sharp eyes flicking over the scene like a hawk surveying prey. His posture signals his readiness not for attack, but for unyielding resistance. Without speaking a word, he conveys a universal truth to those behind him. We stand not for victory, but to hold ground for justice itself. Beside him, Lena remains close, arms at her sides, but the tension in her hands reveals her readiness to spring into action if necessary. The officer who had silenced Coleman earlier now raises his hand, urging everyone to steady themselves. "We've got enough people here already. There's no need for further escalation," he claims loudly, his voice echoing between grim storefronts. The watching crowd lets his words hang, skeptical. In response, a large man from among the Crescent Pack steps forward, clearly acting as a voice for the wider group. His broad shoulders cast long shadows under the streetlights. His name, Cole, is etched into his jacket patch, but what everyone feels is the soft power in his steady words. "We've been watching every second. You don't understand. De-escalating doesn't mean silencing truths or forcing injustice to retreat out of visibility. It means accountability. So, unless you ensure it tonight, we'll keep standing." There's an audible shift. The crowd moves slightly behind Cole's surging confidence. The phrase "justice over shrinking" begins to feel infectious while setting a community resolve much differently than roadside pride scenes. Quick fade-offs otherwise might left like, suddenly, Coleman becomes reanimated. Ignoring authority requests, second backing instead his dry sneered resistance trotting, "Got our level backups weren't ever failure." Ridiculously smirking, serious afterward pumping cues. Worst dice allowed. Lena nudges quiet but visibly poised. Vibrating purpose alone. Absolutely nail preservation-driven readiness hints. Through harness, sudden imbalanced issues. Full group honed forward. Twilight descends fully upon Red Hollow, painting the town in tones of shadow and starlight. The quiet hum of tension grows sharper now, the charged atmosphere snapping like static in the air. In the dim yellow glow of the streetlights, the Crescent Pack stands rigid, their silent bikes casting long, distorted shapes across the asphalt like ancient sentinels. The pulse of the town, once serene and unbothered, feels as if it has quickened, spurred by the events spiraling from confrontation to exposed truths. At the forefront, Ryder holds his ground, legs slightly apart, arms loose at his sides in a stance that radiates calm power. His gaze is locked on Coleman, the disgraced officer whose trembling hand remains inches from his holster. Around them, the crowd shifts uneasily, shuffling closer to one another as if seeking the solidarity that the Crescent Pack embodies. To the side, Lena studies the scene with hawk-like precision. Her mind races through every potential escalation and countermeasure, her sharp green eyes never leaving Coleman's face. Clearly, he's cracking. Dangerous. She leans toward Ryder, her voice low but firm. He's itching to make a mistake, Ryder. One wrong look and he's going for that gun. Let him, Ryder says evenly, his deep voice almost too soft to hear over the murmuring crowd. She glances at him sharply, but his unshaken expression tells her that it's not bravado, it's strategy. One decisive move, Lena realizes, and the whole town's focus will shift permanently to the moral rot under the badge. And Ryder knows it. Coleman's face reddens again as his partner, the second officer whose calm demeanor has so far diffused the worst impulse histories, to guide him away once more. Coleman, you're not helping the situation. We need to step back and re-establish control responsibly, he says, voice low and steady. But Coleman's lips curl into a sneer, his pride seething with the weight of public judgment. I've had enough of this circus, Coleman barks. His voice cracks slightly, betraying the fragility beneath his bluster. Sweat beads at his brow. The atmosphere grows impossibly taut as every iBiker, civilian and cop alike, fixes itself on his quaking figure. From the crowd, a young mother clutching her stroller steps forward hesitantly. Her face is pale but touched with determination. You've already hurt one man tonight, she says, her voice trembling but audible. Don't do it again. The crowd murmurs in agreement, voices growing louder. Words like accountability and injustice ripple through their murmurs, emboldened by her bravery. It's enough to unhinge Coleman as he whirls to face the bystanders, his hand clenching and unclenching by his sidearm. Step back, Coleman yells. Everyone step back or I swear. You swear what? Lena cuts in sharply, stepping forward with pointed authority. Her voice rings clear, as sharp as the edge of a blade. You've already shown Red Hollow what kind of man you are. Why don't you prove us wrong right now and back down? Coleman's hand stills. For a moment, silence cascades over the street. But then, with a sound almost too quick to register, his weapon clears its holster. The collective gasp from the crowd surges like a tidal wave, and Lena freezes, her body tensing for whatever happens next. Before Coleman can lift the gun fully, Ryder steps forward with the fluidity of someone who knows confrontation too well. He moves between Coleman and Lena, his towering form an immovable barrier. Coleman falters, his aim unwieldy, his confidence wavering under Ryder's piercing gaze. You pull that trigger, Ryder growls slowly, each word weighted with meaning, and there won't be a single way left to justify yourself. Not to this town, not to anyone. You'll just be another bully with a badge. The words seem to hang in the air long enough to suffocate what little composure Coleman possesses. His arm shakes, the muzzle of the gun dipping slightly. The second officer steps closer but does not yet intervene, watching closely as if trying to gauge whether Ryder's presence alone is enough to defuse the situation. In the diner, the teenager holding their phone for the live stream captures the precarious tableau. In the live stream's comment feed, thousands of voices boil with outrage, support, and dread. The screen floods with phrases like, "Disarm him," and "This is unreal," as the raw, unfiltered truth of Red Hollow's standoff spills into digital permanence. The weight of the town, the gaze of its people, and the silent vigilance of the Crescent Pack begin to press down on Coleman. Finally, with a guttural growl of frustration, he snaps the gun back into its holster. The exhale from the crowd is nearly deafening. But before relief can truly settle, headlights blaze in the distance. A low rumbling growl builds from engines not belonging to the Crescent Pack. Another biker group rolls into view, their presence as dark and menacing as smoke crawling over the horizon. Unlike the Crescent Pack, these bikers are rougher, less unified in appearance but equally formidable. The leader of this new group, a heavily scarred man with a domineering stance, rides to the front and stares at the scene before him with a calculating smirk. He looks to Ryder with something close to amusement. "Well, well," the man says, his voice gravelly and loud enough to carry across the street. "Looks like we stumbled into a party." The Crescent Pack visibly stiffens. The tension, already impossibly thick, becomes suffocating under the weight of this new arrival. Lena narrows her eyes but keeps her composure. "Who invited trouble?" she mutters under her breath. The scarred leader steps off his bike, surveying the crowd, the police, the Crescent Pack, and the live-streaming teen with equal interest. "Saw the stream," he says casually. "Figured we'd drop by and see if justice really needed a helping hand." His words drip with mockery as he turns to face Ryder directly. "But it looks like you've got things handled. Right. Ryder, is it?" Ryder doesn't respond immediately. His eyes sweep over the scarred man's group. A mismatched collection of bikers whose unpredictability is evident in their wild eyes and restless postures. "You're late," Ryder says finally, his tone neutral but edged with warning. "And we don't need your kind of help." The scarred man chuckles darkly. "Oh, I think you do. See, you're all about standing tall, making a statement, but some statements—" He takes a deliberate step closer, his grin widening. "Need to leave an impression." The Crescent Pack subtly shifts, their unity as tight as a coiled spring. Lena steps closer to Ryder, lowering her voice. "He's provoking you. Doesn't mean a thing unless you let him." "I know," Ryder replies, but his stance remains firm, unyielding. His attention, like the street itself, belongs entirely to the looming figure before him. The scarred man tilts his head, feigning curiosity. "You're not afraid of them, are you?" He gestures toward the police, smirking as if his mere presence has thrown gasoline onto an already volatile fire. "No, I don't think fear's your issue. I think it's that you're soft." "Soft?" Lena spits before Ryder can answer. Her voice slices through the tension like a blade. "We're here to stop bloodshed, not create it. You wouldn't know the difference if it stared you in the face." The scarred man's grin fades slightly, his eyes narrowing. A new layer of animosity floods the air, pulling the crowd back into uneasy silence. But before Lena or the man can escalate further, Ryder steps forward. "We're better than this," Ryder says, his voice carrying. "Better than taunts, better than ego, better than chaos." His eyes lock onto those of the scarred man, a silent challenge threaded with conviction. "Walk away. If you care about justice, don't make this about you." For a moment, the man considers Ryder's words. The street seems frozen, every breath held in collective anticipation of his decision. Finally, he smirks once more, but this time it seems forced. "Looks like we'll let you play the hero, for now." He turns back to his bike, barking orders to his group. One by one, they mount their machines and roar away into the night, leaving a wake of uncertainty behind. The atmosphere lightens marginally, but the weight of the night's events remains. As the rumble of the departing bikes fades, the crowd begins to stir again, their murmurs echoing with cautious relief. But for the Crescent Pack, the night is far from over. Ryder exchanges a look with Lena, who nods imperceptibly. "This isn't done," she says quietly. "Not by a long shot." "No," Ryder agrees, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the scarred man disappeared. "It's just beginning." From behind, the teenager in the diner shouts something that turns heads. "Over here! You need to see this!" And just like that, the energy pivots once more, drawn to a revelation yet unknown. Recap. Coleman draws his weapon in a moment of desperation, but is stopped by Ryder's unflinching resolve. As relief begins to settle, a new biker gang arrives, sweeping the tension higher until Ryder diffuses their provocations with calculated force. But a call from the diner promises yet another twist, leaving the night's outcome hanging in the balance. The dark moonlit sky has settled fully over Red Hollow, heavy with tension and the low hum of lingering motorcycle engines. The Crescent Pack stands steadfast, their shadows illuminated by the faint glow of streetlights, while the assembled townsfolk form a wary, scattered arc around them. As the echo of the scarred man's retreating gang fades into the distance, attention snaps back to the diner, where voices carry above the subdued murmurs. "Over here!" The teen live-streaming the entire ordeal waves their phone urgently, their excitement cutting through the weariness of the crowd. The camera flashlight is pointed down a narrow alley behind the diner, its flickering beam casting trembling distortions across the pavement. Among the fragmented light, a sliver of movement, something or someone unseen, catches the spectator's wary gaze. "What now?" Lena mutters under her breath, stepping closer to Ryder, who remains calm yet every fiber of his being seems coiled and ready. She gestures subtly toward the new disturbance. "Want me to check it out?" Ryder shakes his head, his voice low but firm. "We're not giving them an excuse. If this is a distraction, we won't split." From the alley, the wiry man who accused Officer Coleman of shoving Emery emerges halfway, his face pale but resolute. He gestures back toward the shadows he had come from, speaking to the whole street now. There's someone else. Someone who saw everything. I didn't want to drag them into this, but… Before he can finish, another figure steps nervously out of the alleyway. It's a young girl no older than 13. Her thin frame is dwarfed by the oversized hoodie she clutches tightly around her, its hood partially shading her face. She squints against the sudden attention. There's no way, Lena blurts in quiet disbelief, her sharp green eyes fixed on the girl. She's a child. The diner door swings open and a young mother gasps audibly, clasping her hand over her mouth. That's Sophie, she exclaims. She's been missing for days. The revelation ripples through the crowd like a shockwave, mingling disbelief with horror. Whispers erupt anew, their urgency fueled by this unexpected turn of events. The second officer, clearly alarmed, steps towards Sophie cautiously, his hands visibly empty and raised in a gesture of reassurance. Sophie? He asks gently, his voice softer than it's been all night. Are you hurt? Do you need help? But Sophie doesn't focus on him. Her wide eyes dart between the Crescent Pack and the officers before landing on Ryder. Something in his composed, towering presence seems to anchor her amidst the chaos. She takes a halting step forward, clutching the fabric of her hoodie tighter. You're them, aren't you? Sophie says, her voice barely audible but strung with threads of hope and desperation. The ones who stand up when no one else will. Ryder's body barely moves, but his voice commands the space. Depends, kid. What's it you need standing up for? Sophie's lips tremble, and she looks down, visibly wrestling with something heavy. When she finally speaks, her voice cracks with the weight of her words. He took me, she says, pointing toward Coleman. He's the one who took me. The street explodes with reactions. Gasps, shouts, murmuring chaos. Every possible emotion crashes over the crowd at once. Townsfolk back away, mothers clutch their children closer, and even the Crescent Pack members exchange tense, shocked looks. Coleman's face transforms into a mask of unbridled rage and panic. What? He spits, his voice a blend of disbelief and desperate denial. This is absurd, she's lying. But Sophie doesn't flinch. Her chin lifts slightly, her youthful voice finding unexpected strength. I'm not lying. You took me in your car, the police car. You said no one would believe me if I told them. You said… Her voice falters, but when she looks at Ryder, his silent, unwavering presence seems to bolster her resolve. You said I was nothing. The words hang in the air like a gunshot, the silence that follows crackling with suppressed energy. Coleman, his composure shredded, takes a defiant step forward, his face contorted with fury. This is a setup, he shouts. They're all against me. This street circus, it's a sham. Ryder doesn't move, his voice cutting through Coleman's frantic outburst like a blade. The only sham here is your badge if what she says is true. He steps forward slowly, every measured movement radiating quiet authority. And you already showed Red Hollow what kind of man you are tonight. Back off! Coleman snarls, his hand darting toward his holster again. But this time, even his partner intervenes. Don't! The second officer barks, placing himself between Coleman and the crowd. His voice is firm, authoritative in a way Coleman's never was. You're already in too deep, Coleman. Don't make it worse. Coleman's hand trembles on his weapon, but he doesn't draw it. His breathing is ragged, his chest rising and falling with labored fury. Facing Ryder head-on, he hisses venomously, You don't know who you're messing with. No, Ryder replies evenly, his words deliberate and searing. But you don't know who you're standing against. 99 of us, plus this whole town watching, cameras rolling, truth out in the open. You think you walk away from that? The livestream team pans their camera around dramatically, capturing Red Hollow's transformation, an entire community standing together under the blistering weight of truth. In the comments, a flood of viewers demand action. Arrest him! Justice now! Protect Sophie! The digital vigils ignite, their outcry swelling louder and more fervent than ever. The crowd seems to take strength from this unseen audience. Even those who had been hesitant step forward, their voices joining the growing vigil for justice. Shouts of "Enough!" and "Protect her!" drown out the chaos as the pressure mounts against Coleman. Finally, the second officer speaks, his words slicing through the noise. I'm placing you under arrest, Coleman, he says grimly, for misconduct, abuse of authority, and pending investigation into this young girl's claims. He reaches for his handcuffs, but Coleman jerks away violently. "Don't touch me!" Coleman roars, his desperation exploding into reckless action. In a blur of motion, he yanks his weapon free and spins, pointing it wildly, not at Ryder, nor the officers, but at Sophie. The collective scream from the crowd is deafening. Gasps, cries, and chaos erupt as Sophie freezes, rooted in place. But even as panic threatens to consume the street, one figure moves faster than fear. Ryder surges forward, his every action precise and controlled. In a single motion, he twists Coleman's gun arm upward, the shot fired harmlessly into the sky. The deafening roar of the gunshot momentarily silences the chaos, drawing every eye to the intense struggle unfolding in the street. Coleman fights like a man cornered, his movements wild and erratic. But Ryder's strength and training prevail, his grip like iron as he wrenches the weapon from Coleman's hand and tosses it aside. Without breaking his stride, he forces Coleman to the ground, pinning him with calculated efficiency. "Enough!" Ryder growls, his voice low but thunderous. "This ends now." The second officer rushes forward, snapping the handcuffs onto Coleman's wrists as the disgraced officer writhes and spits curses. "You're done, Coleman," he says, his voice filled with equal parts relief and disgust. It's over. The crowd erupts into cheers and applause, the tension that had gripped Red Hollow finally breaking like a dam giving way. Mothers hug their children tightly, neighbors clasp hands, and the Crescent Pack raises their fists in silent triumph. Sophie stands motionless, tears streaming silently down her cheeks as the weight of the moment crashes over her. When Ryder approaches, she looks up at him with wide, grateful eyes. You saved me," she whispers. "No," Ryder says, his tone gentle yet firm. "You saved yourself by speaking up. We just stood with you." The quiet conviction in his words settles over the crowd, their cheers softening into a solemn respect. The Crescent Pack starts their engines one by one, the deep rumbles vibrating through the pavement, a final act of unity before the night can claim the town once more. As the officers haul a defeated Coleman away, cameras flash and the live stream buzzes with fervent commentary. Lena steps beside Ryder, her sharp gaze scanning the dispersing crowd. "This isn't the end," she says, her voice filled with weary determination. "What happened tonight was just the beginning. There's more like him out there." "I know," Ryder replies, his expression unreadable as he watches Sophie reunite with her tearful mother. "But tonight, the people saw what it means to stand together. And that's how we win, one moment at a time." As the Crescent Pack begins to ride off into the night, the distant wail of yet another siren underscores that the battle for justice is never truly over. But for now, Red Hollow breathes a little easier, its streets marked not by fear, but by courage, unity, and the undeniable power of voices raised against injustice. Recap. Sophie's accusations against Coleman plunged the situation into a dramatic climax, culminating in Ryder's heroic intervention to stop a desperate act. The night ends with a glimmer of hope as justice begins to take hold, but the fight is far from over. The cool night air hangs heavy over Red Hollow, laced with a sense of collective exhaustion. The echoes of the town's recent standstill still reverberate through the streets, a reminder of the simmering fury and newfound resolve that had taken hold of both the Crescent Pack and the impassioned townsfolk. The scene outside the diner, charged with the weight of Sophie's revelations and the arrest of Officer Coleman, has calmed but not cleared. Justice remains an unsettled dust in the air, one that refuses to settle until the whole truth is exposed. Ryder's boots hit the pavement in slow, deliberate thuds as he paces near his bike. There's tension in his walk, purpose in every step. Lena keeps close beside him, her arms crossed and her sharp green eyes keenly observing the officers bundling Coleman into the back of a squad car. The suspect's shouts and sputtered protests grow muffled as the door closes, but the energy he left behind feels like a wound that will take time and more than one victory to heal. Behind the Crescent Pack, the townsfolk linger, unsure of what comes next. The murmured voices of neighbors rise and fall like the tide, weaving together fear of retribution and whispered gratitude for the bikers who dared to stand when others faltered. Somewhere in the knot of people, Sophie clings tightly to her mother, her small figure trembling under the weight of her disclosure. The moment had asked so much of her, and yet it seems to have taken even more. Ryder stops pacing, turning his gaze towards Sophie. His expression softens just briefly as he watches her reunite with the woman who clearly hadn't given up searching. Whatever anger he carries, whatever fire burns for justice, it tempers in the presence of a child who had chosen courage when fear would have been easier. He exhales, slow and measured, before turning back to Lena. "That girl's braver than most," he says, his voice low but resolute. "Braver than some of the adults who were here long before us." "She had no one before tonight," Lena replies, tilting her head toward the officers. "And if that man in cuffs taught us anything, it's that she'd have stayed voiceless if we didn't show up." Beyond their words, the town holds its breath. Officers confer in hurried tones near their cruisers, radio chatter flickering faintly as decisions are made far above their heads. Whatever happens next means more than arrests or applauses. It means consequences, follow-through, not just for Coleman, but for the systems that allowed him to roost undisturbed in Red Hollow until now. Lena shifts her weight and squints toward the diner, catching something unusual out of the corner of her eye. A faint glow flickers in the window, a pale blue light that doesn't belong to the street lamp spilling yellow onto the asphalt. The live stream. "Ryder," Lena murmurs, nodding toward the diner where the teenager with the phone still stands recording. Their broadcast angling decisively onto Sophie's teary eyes and the surrounding chaos. The sheer clarity of their camera work captures what others might overlook. Soft details of an unassuming town slicing through the film of a broken facade. Red Hollow is no longer just a small place with quiet injustices hidden under its soil. Ryder's sharp eyes follow Lena's gaze, narrowing at the implication. That live stream isn't just for the town anymore. It's for the world. Social feeds are buzzing, timelines stacking anger and solidarity simultaneously. A young voice projected through messy cell phone data had transcended the alley it started in. "People are watching," Ryder acknowledges quietly. His voice doesn't sound pleased or unsettled. It's a neutral reckoning with the reality of this fight extending further than he had planned. "We're on the map now." "They've always been watching, they just forgot to care," Lena mutters, her gaze flicking briefly toward the scene where Sophie stays hunched, trembling lightly but stubbornly to stay upright. The world had watched before, and as far as Lena had seen, apathy won out as often as concern. As they speak, the cool night seems to shift again, this time with the faint and unmistakable hum of additional engines approaching from the south side of town. Not more police cars, not civilians bolstered by courage from the safety of the diner. More bikers, and with the pale headlights cutting through the shadows, their origin is clear. Lena stiffens first. She mutters a soft curse, eyes narrowing. Back again. Vultures don't take long these days. "I thought they'd left," Ryder says under his breath, but his tone doesn't carry surprise. He speaks like someone resigned to trouble finding its way back, no matter how many times a smirk or insult rides out of town, pretending there won't be consequences. The rumbling bikes slow as the scarred man from earlier reemerges at the lead of his pack. This time his numbers have doubled, rough figures casting lingering shadows in the pale moonlight, a stark contrast to the Crescent Pack's stark unity and resolve. The scarred man dismounts with practiced arrogance, his posture cocked to suggest he's expecting submission, not resistance. "Well," he says with a gravelly laugh, his scar twisting grotesquely as his smug grin spreads. "Didn't think the curtain would rise again tonight, but here we are. Backstage gets real lonely without an encore, don't it?" Ryder steps away from his bike, his movement steady and deliberate like slow thunder rolling over a distant plain. His calm demeanor conceals a storm beneath, one Lena sees as sure as the steel grips of her weapons. She knows Ryder won't want unleashed prematurely. "We told you to walk away," Ryder says evenly, his words carrying weight but not yet threat. "Take the hint." The scarred man's grin widens, though there's an edge to his amusement this time, a realization perhaps that Ryder's not bluffing, or a readiness brewing behind that watchful gaze. "I thought I'd let you borrow the spotlight, Ryder," he says, gesturing vaguely toward the alley and the lingering crowd of civilians turned spectators, but it seems like there's more room for players on that stage. Behind him, his bikers laugh harshly, their mockery rippling through the scene like approaching static. The energy crackles, unfinished and incomplete, like dry wood daring to catch flame. Around the Crescent Pack, members notice subtle movements, the way hands hover closer to triggers, or uneven weight shifts betraying reckless impulses. Lena moves into Ryder's side view, jaw tightening. "If we don't set terms, he'll invent them," she hisses. But Ryder catches her eye, just once, and his barely there nod is all that's needed to signal patience. The scarred man steps closer, his shadow stretching unnaturally toward Ryder's boots. "The world's eye is on you now, buddy," he growls lowly. "Least you could do is share that glory with those gutsy enough to join. Or are you afraid your little justice club can't play nice with the mean kids?" From the diner, the teens' phone locks. Directly onto this exchange, every sneer, every shift. Their live stream chat explodes yet again, the energy rising in tandem with the rising tension. Ryder waits until the last echo of false confidence dies in the scarred man's final snicker. Then he speaks low, leveled, yet somehow louder than the brewing chaos threatening to overtake the crowd. "This town doesn't need you," his voice carries again. "It needed people willing to stand before others joined. Didn't wait for someone else's fight to start." "What's that mean?" Scarredman's grin falters, edges hard. "It means," Ryder continues flatly, stepping closer into range but not threatening forward adversary for cameras baiting him, "you won't earn moral high ground after showing up nights post-crisis, lingering jackals optional if you're showing after people left first. Limbo holds seatbacks forced. Night bleeds further into uncertainty, its cloak thick and oppressive over the now-fractured town of Red Hollow. The once loud chatter from the crowd has dwindled to murmurs, their hope tempered by exhaustion and unease. Sophie, a child unfairly thrust into the whirlwind, has retreated into her mother's protective arms, her small figure hunched like a bird weathering a storm. But the watching world, still tuned into the diner's unblinking livestream, demands more. Justice may have cracked the surface tonight, but accountability feels as fleeting as smoke on the wind. The Crescent Pack stands on the edge of the street, their engines still silent but their presence radiating defiance. In the space of one night, they've transformed from a quiet group of nomads into Red Hollow's reluctant pillars of hope. Yet, tension sits heavy in the air, anchored by the opposing gang that looms on the peripheral by the scarred man, whose aura of provocation has not waned since his earlier retreat. It eases back into place now, curling around the space like a predator's shadow. "Justice doesn't need you," Ryder repeats to him, his words sharp but calm. Standing under the town's single glaring street lamp, he's both guardian and unyielding judge. The menace in the scarred man's grin curves wider, a near-perfect replica of a predator enjoying its sport. "Doesn't it, though? Seems your version of justice could use a bit of teeth," he quips, the low growl of his voice sparking faint laughter from his assembled crew. Their numbers have indeed grown ragtag appearances, masking the true danger they pose. Each of their bikes thrum quietly beneath them, barely breaking the fragile silence, but more unnerving than any sound. Lena tightens her arms across her chest, suppressing the frustration burning just under her stoic surface. Her posture speaks volumes to those paying attention. Don't underestimate her. Her sharp eyes pin the scarred man in place. "Justice doesn't need scavengers or opportunists," she says, her voice cutting clean through the weighty stillness. "And you? All you're doing is looking for a way to stir the pot. Why don't you save yourself the humiliation and ride out before we have to clean up your mess too?" The scarred man's laughter is quick, bitter, and dismissive, but there's an edge to it, a slight crack in his armor. Talk big for someone so willing to play nice with the rules. You think the world changes because you stand around all righteous? His gravelly tone rises slightly, thick with disdain. All it's ever earned anyone is another boot on their throat. "For some of us, that's all the reason we need to fight," Ryder interrupts smoothly, his voice eclipsing the scarred man's bravado without strain. He doesn't move closer but manages to fill the space between them, his calm dwarfed only by his imposing presence. "And fighting doesn't mean becoming the thing you're standing against." His words are heavier now, imbued with warning. The scarred man's gaze flickers, not with fear, but with exasperation poorly veiled as indifference. His pack stirs restlessly behind him, their shared anticipation thickening like storm clouds on the horizon. In this exchange of words, they clearly see the first faint hint of flames. Whatever they're waiting for, they expect it to burn. Ryder seems to sense this unspoken conversation unfolding with the scarred man's crew. His shoulders shift slightly, and his expression hardens just enough to reveal the line he's unwilling to cross. He knows what's at stake. He knows what even one mistake will cost tonight. Not just for him and his group, but for Sophie and every bystander currently finding their courage through the Crescent Pack's strength. The tension ripples subtle but electric. Lena notices it too, her sharp instincts honed over years of bracing for impact, both literal and figurative. She leans slightly toward Ryder, her voice low, meant only for him. "They're waiting," she murmurs. "Every second we stand here, they're weighing the odds. Watching the crowd get bolder. Watching us try to talk instead of strike. Sooner or later, this snarling pack of strays is going to make their move." "I know," Ryder replies, his own voice steady to the point of being unnervingly calm. "But the only move we make right now is standing firm." The scarred man shifts his weight, sensing the resolve hardening before him. His laughter fades, dropping into something darker. "You think you're clever," he says slowly, his voice tinged with a condescension that feels almost rehearsed. "A big, righteous hero in your little leather jacket. But let me tell you something. Ryder, this world doesn't care about your morals, your unity, or your so-called justice." He takes a deliberate step forward, his scar catching the faint glow of the streetlight in a way that makes his grin even more grotesque. "In the end, strength decides, not words." "If that were true, you wouldn't still be talking," Lena shoots back before Ryder can answer, her fiery tone igniting murmurs from the surrounding crowd. Eyes dart uncertainly between her and the scarred man, but no one, civilian or Crescent Pack biker alike, misses the flicker of suppressed anger in the latter's stance. The scarred man's grin tightens, less jovial and more venomous now. "Cute," he mutters. His hand hovers near the chain hooked at his belt, a predatory gleam flickering in his narrowed eyes. "Let's see how much more you've got to say when we're done here." The crowd recoils slightly despite the relative quiet of the statement, their unease palpable as they stir against Red Hollow's broken sidewalks. Only the Crescent Pack stands immovable, the sheer force of their collective calm like a pressure valve keeping the impending storm restrained for now. Then, a voice small but firm pierces the mounting tension. "Stop!" Sophie's word hangs in the air like an unexpected gust of wind through stagnant heat. The weight of it feels surreal against the towering figures, roaring bikes, and crackling anticipation of cants. The scarred man's gaze snaps toward her instantly, the mocking cruelty in his expression faltering for the barest of moments. "What did you say?" His tone is incredulous, as though the very idea of being addressed by a child borders on insult. The scarred man's voice feels physically heavier when directed at her, though its growling hubris betrays cracks born of surprise. "I said stop," Sophie repeats, louder this time. Her voice trembles slightly, and her mother's arms tighten protectively around her small shoulders. Despite the fear clearly roiling beneath her youthful bravery, she doesn't falter. Her wide, tear-streaked eyes remain locked on the scarred man, daring him to dismiss her. "You're just making it worse. For you, for us, for everyone." No one breathes. Even the Crescent Pack tilts subtly in Sophie's direction, not out of pity, but respect for the immense weight of her words. Ryder's gaze flickers toward the small figure standing so defiantly toward the darkness facing her. His expression doesn't soften this time. Instead, it sharpens, a faint echo of pride under miles of honed vigilance. He allows the silence she's created to linger an extra beat before he speaks. "She's right," Ryder says solemnly, his deep voice sweeping across the tension like an anchor sinking into sand. "Every word." His back straightens slightly, his arms folding across his chest as he shifts his full attention back to the scarred man. "If you want to push this, know what you're pushing against. Her, this town, this truth." The scarred man hesitates, not long, but enough for those watching to notice. Whatever bravado fueled his earlier theatrics seems less certain now, as though Sophie's simple words have stripped him of his surety. And yet, threats linger in the tense set of his jaw, the twitch of his hand by the chain as though weighing the remaining shreds of his authority against the risk of pressing further tonight. "Let it go," Ryder murmurs, his tone quiet but unshakable. "Walk away while you still can." For a fleeting moment, it seems the scarred man might defy him. His gang shifts restlessly behind him, their collective unease flickering like dancing shadows in the lamplight. But then, with a sharp exhale and a growl of frustration, he steps back toward his bike, as though conceding something he doesn't yet understand. "This isn't over," the scarred man spits, his words a venomous promise directed squarely at the Crescent Pack. He mounts his bike in one fluid motion, gesturing for his crew to follow. The pack hesitates but eventually obeys, their engines rumbling back to life one by one until the roar of their departure drowns out the faint buzz of murmurs from the remaining crowd. Long after their taillights vanish into the horizon, the silence of their absence doesn't soothe, it unsettles. Ryder doesn't immediately relax, His gaze lingers on the street where the gang departed, a faint shadow crossing his carefully controlled expression. Beside him, Lena exhales sharply and mutters under her breath, "Not over, sure, but at least not tonight." "No," Ryder agrees quietly, his voice carrying weight beyond exhaustion. "But whatever fight comes next, we'll be ready." The thick velvet of the night falls deeper over Red Hollow, each passing moment edging the town closer to an uncertain reckoning. Where once the Crescent Pack's united front dominated the street, there now lies a fractured tension, a splintering of resolve left in the wake of the scarred man's departure. The gang had retreated for now, and yet the heavy growl of their engines lingers in the minds of all who stand witness, like an echo that refuses to fade. Somewhere in the distance, the scarce cries of wildlife are muted by an uncomfortable silence. Ryder adjusts the weight of his stance, his boots pressing against the uneven asphalt as he lets his gaze wander across the battered crowd. Sophie, still clutching her mother tightly, now stands directly under the faint beam of the diner's neon sign. The flickering glow makes her small frame appear almost ethereal, a child lit by the burdens of a night no child should ever endure. The restless town stirs like an uneasy tide, and Ryder casts a glance toward Lena, whose arms are folded tight, her fingers tapping lightly against her elbow. Her sharp green eyes remain locked on the street, watching for shadows that might creep from the places no one is looking, because Lena knows threats don't always announce themselves with roaring engines and twisted smirks. "We're not done here," she mutters under her breath, her voice a quiet current meant only for Ryder. "Not until the bastards that lot stirred up figure out where they stand." She nods subtly at the jittery locals who've lingered out of curiosity and fear. Ryder looks at her briefly, his expression unreadable. Then his gaze shifts back toward Sophie, her fragile frame trembling despite the layers of warmth she's wrapped herself in. The soft murmur of Sophie whispering to her mother carries faintly through the air, almost drowned out by the crowd's breathless anticipation. "We'll find out soon enough," Ryder remarks to Lena, his tone soft but steady like a boulder resisting the weight of the river. The distant rise of a siren cuts through the quiet, its keening cry a reminder of unfinished business. Every head in the crowd swivels toward the south side of town, where the faint red and blue hues of flashing lights creep over the horizon like a restless specter. The Crescent Pack doesn't flinch. They don't move. Just the quiet rumble of their presence keeps the civilians tethered, their last rope against the tide of fear that threatens to overcome Red Hollow's broken streets. "It's not backup for Coleman," Lena says, a tilt of her head beckoning toward the approaching lights. "These are rookies out of their depth if I've ever seen it." Ryder exhales, his sharp eyes narrowing slightly as he tracks the police cruiser's approach. When the vehicles pull to a halt 50 feet from the crowd, dust kicks up around their tires in plumes illuminated by the beams of their headlights. Two officers step out swiftly, their movements brisk and unsure. Both are younger, their faces betraying the nerves that accompany those still unaccustomed to the weight of the badge. One of them speaks first. "We got a report of—" His voice falters at the sight of the Crescent Pack, lined like statues against the chaos. He glances at Ryder before stepping forward. "Of unrest. Can someone here tell us what's going on?" Ryder doesn't answer immediately. He holds the officer's gaze long enough to watch him squirm, let him realize how new authority looks when set against riders who've seen the world's worst. Finally, Lena steps forward, sliding ahead of Ryder with slow, deliberate confidence. Her tone cuts sharp but measured through the growing unease. "You took too long to show up," she says flatly. "Coleman's already in custody. You missed the part where everyone else stepped up to do your job." The officer's brow furrows. "We heard conflicting reports. Violence. An assault." "And what did you do?" Lena interrupts, her stare leveling him where he stands. "Wait for the situation to unravel while the town tore itself apart? Or did you just hope that someone would sweep it under the rug while you figured out how to write it off?" A faint hush falls over the crowd at Lena's words, her pointed challenge capturing something that Red Hollow has long felt but rarely voiced. The officer flinches but doesn't retreat. Instead, his partner steps closer, his face painted with quiet unease. "She means Coleman," Ryder steps in, his voice a measured rumble that commands attention without rising. "You missed the part where one of your own lost control, pushed his authority too far. And you missed the part where a child showed more courage in minutes than he did the damage in years." The second officer's gaze shifts toward Sophie, still clutching tightly to her mother's side. His mouth opens slightly, but no words come out. He seems frozen, unsure whether Red Hollow is worth defending, condemning, or simply leaving behind. We think you should start here, Ryder adds, the weight of his words striking a balance between calm and firm as he gestures to Sophie. Talk to her. Listen before you make it worse. Suddenly, a voice breaks through the crowd, hesitant yet steady. It's the young woman who earlier admitted to seeing Coleman push Emery. She's telling the truth, isn't she? She asks quietly, her cheeks flushed but her resolve building as her eyes scan the tense gathering. About Coleman and everything. We all saw some of it, some part. The murmurs grow again, voices weaving together as embers reignite deeper flames. Others step forward, slowly at first, then in pairs. Witness after witness recounts fragments of the night. The humiliation of Emery, Coleman's arrogance, Sophie's bravery, and by the time the circle of townsfolk has finished, the fact remains glaringly clear to all present. Coleman's abuses had been woven into Red Hollow for far too long. Lena's lips twitch not in amusement, but faint validation. She looks toward Ryder, who hasn't moved an inch. They're waking up, she comments softly. What do you think happens next? Ryder gives a slight shrug, the answer heavy without being said aloud. That depends entirely on them. The younger officers, outnumbered yet trapped between duty and fear, exchange uncertain glances. Finally, the first officer speaks again, but this time his tone bears less bravado. This is above our pay grade. We'll need to call this in. Go then, Ryder replies curtly. The longer you drag your feet, the louder this town gets, and when people stand this loud, someone else will come along to answer, whether you do or not. The officer hesitates but nods. The pair retreats to their vehicles, their radios crackling faintly as they drive off into the night. Red Hollow watches their departure, not with relief but an awareness that the responsibility for justice no longer lies solely in the hands of external authorities. It pulses here now, among the people, sparked by courage and carried by those unafraid of the weight. As the murmuring crowd begins to dissipate, the energy shifts subtly back to the Crescent Pack. Ryder turns towards Sophie, walking closer until he stands a comfortable distance from her and her mother. When Sophie looks up, her red-rimmed eyes focus on Ryder, trusting despite her exhaustion. I couldn't have done any of this without you, she whispers. The words carry small, but their sincerity presses firm. Without all of you. She looks briefly toward Lena and the rest of the Crescent Pack before settling back on Ryder. Thank you. It's Lena who replies this time, surprising the girl as she steps closer, her posture loosening just slightly. You didn't need us, Lena says quietly but firmly. We were just a platform. You changed things tonight because you chose not to stay silent. None of this happens without you deciding that first. Sophie doesn't reply immediately. Instead, her lips part faintly, then close as emotion wells too high. But before tears can resurface fully, her mother's hand brushes her shoulder softly, grounding her. Let's go home, her mother whispers into the still air of Red Hollow, gratitude carried faintly in her shaking timbre. As mother and daughter begin their quiet retreat to whatever safety they can find against the backdrop of the night, the Crescent Pack regroups subtly, united without effort as they prepare to mount their own departure. Engines rumble faintly to life, but there's weight yet that hasn't cleared from the arrow weight. Ryder feels most of all. Lena watches him quietly, her green-eyed scrutiny sharp as ever. You're thinking about when this town calls again, aren't you? She remarks softly, reading his movements. About how far we'll be dragged back before it can move forward at all. Ryder doesn't answer with words, at least not right away, but his silence speaks volumes as his jaw tightens faintly, his gaze scanning the bloodless battlefield left behind. It's not frustration that rides alongside him tonight. It's something purer, heavier, responsibility. We'll answer when it comes, he responds finally, throwing his leg over the seat of his bike. Around them, the Crescent Pack shifts subtly, their presence still an unbroken force despite the ripples ahead. We always do. The edges of the horizon bleed darkness into the world as the dim streetlights of Red Hollow illuminate a bruised and battered town. The Crescent Pack gathers silently outside the diner, their massive bikes casting dark shadows that seem to wrap possessively around their boots. After everything that had transpired this evening, the injustice, fury, and exposed truth, you'd think they'd leave with the symbolic victory just earned. But the group remains anchored, rooted as deeply as the courage they ignited in this town. Ryder pulls his gloves tighter over his calloused hands as his eyes sweep slowly over the lingering crowd. Conversations have reduced to whispers. Some townsfolk wipe away tears under the dim light. Others glance anxiously in the direction the scarred man's gang had disappeared. Sophie, now exhausted, clings to her mother's side as they quietly step into the shadows towards safety. The scene feels like the aftermath of a storm that's promised it isn't done yet. Lena sidles up next to Ryder, her expression unreadable, save for the twitch of her lips that hints at irritation. "They'll call it a win," she says softly. There's no judgment in her words, but there is a sharpness, a visible readiness to face the inevitable backlash hidden in corners of Red Hollow yet to be revealed. They won't see the cracks yet. They'll think tonight ended the fight. Ryder doesn't respond immediately. His stance stays perfectly steady, his piercing gaze leveled somewhere in the distance where the scarred man and his pack last rode off. Finally, his deep voice breaks the silence, neither emphatic nor dull, but weighted with the gravity of someone who understands the long game. "We didn't come here to finish anything. We came to make it impossible to ignore." The crumbling asphalt under their boots amplifies Lena's soft exhale, her frustration tempered barely by grudging acceptance of Ryder's unflinching perspective. "You sure they see that?" she asks, nodding toward the crowd. "They're starting to," Ryder replies, still not moving. His calm seems almost unnatural, a dam built in the middle of surging waters. The question isn't whether they see it, it's whether they'll act next time we're not here. The sting of his words carries a sobering truth, one that even Lena can't deny despite her fiery defiance. She folds her arms, scanning the tentative faces of those gathered nearby. The teenage live streamer still clings to their phone, glancing nervously between the bikers and the crowd as if unsure whether to cut the feed or let the entire world stay tuned for the fallout. Near the side of the diner, a shopkeeper wipes the dirt from his hands on a rag, his gaze directed more at the ground than his neighbors. His earlier small step forward, his shaky voice challenging Officer Coleman, felt more like the sputter of an old engine than the roar of action. Still, it was a step he hadn't been willing to take before tonight. "You'll have more than enough to watch your back from that gang," Lena mutters, her voice like flint against stone. "What do you make of the locals? They look to us tonight, but when they're back tomorrow without the Crescent Pack, you think they're willing to shoulder the weight?" Ryder tilts his head fractionally toward her, his expression as solid and inscrutable as stone. "That girl spoke," he says simply. "The bravest step was hers. Someone here will remember." Before Lena can respond, the distant hum of a siren blows through the empty streets again. It's faint, far enough away not to spark panic, but the townsfolk tense noticeably, their collective memory of the scarred man's chaotic gangs and Coleman's long stretch of unchecked power carrying its weight into the night. Lena lifts her chin slightly. "You think it's him, coming back?" "No," Ryder says quietly but firmly. "Not yet." The calm certainty in Ryder's voice is like an anchor, but no one is naive enough to believe the storm has passed indefinitely. The faint whining keens louder, the flashing lights of a distant cruiser cutting softly through the night. Ryder watches the gathering crowd shift nervously as the sound and presence of authority. Another uniform, another badger ignites the fear that had mirrored Coleman's abuses earlier in the evening. When the cruiser finally halts just shy of the Crescent Pack, two officers step out swiftly. They're older, more seasoned than the rookies from before, their movements deliberate and confident without posturing. The lead officer scans the scene, taking silent but calculated stock. "Evening," the officer begins, his voice carrying a calm authority that cuts cleanly through the crowd's murmurs. When no one responds, he squares his shoulders and raises his voice slightly. "Someone going to explain what I just drove into at this hour?" Lena opens her mouth to speak, her usual fire obvious in the tension of her frame. But when Ryder's heavy hand lifts ever so slightly, she pauses, letting him take point. "Coleman's been dealt with," Ryder says simply, though there's a quiet weight to his words that feels less like a victory and more like an indictment. The town spoke for itself. The officer narrows his eyes slightly, his expression flickering into something unreadable. He steps slightly closer to Ryder, though his posture doesn't carry aggression. His voice drops, meant more for the Crescent Pack's ears than the lingering crowd. "I've heard of your group. People watch what you do. Doesn't mean they all agree with it." "Don't care," Lena cuts in sharply before Ryder can respond, folding her arms across her chest. "You can either respect what we stepped up for tonight, or you can tell me where your people were while this town's kids went ignored." Her tone bites as easily as her glare commands attention. The officer flashes a brief glance at her, but it's indifferent at best. His attention fixes back on Ryder, scrutinizing the man whose height, presence, and quiet authority have remained fixed and unyielding through the night. "You're not supposed to be the law," the officer says evenly. "Neither are bullies behind badges," Ryder replies, his voice calm but implacable. "Your town called for help. We answered. You're here now, so answer better next time." At the back of the crowd, Sophie suddenly shifts in her mother's grip. Her small voice, surprisingly clear despite her trembling frame, breaks the tension. "Why does it matter who helped?" she asks, directing her question at the officer without hesitation. Though her voice shakes slightly, there's a thread of determination that hasn't left since her first defiance tonight. "Doesn't it just matter that someone did?" The officer's expression falters just briefly, barely noticeable to anyone but those closest to him. But for Ryder, it's enough. The crack in certainty, the faint hesitation of a man wrestling with the truth of actions unspoken and weight left bearing down on others. The officer takes a slight step back, nodding almost imperceptibly before tilting his attention toward Sophie. "You're right," he says finally. "It matters." In that small acknowledgement, the tension dissipates just slightly. Yet it's clear to everyone present, townsfolk, Crescent Pack alike, that this isn't an ending, merely an uneasy truce against the backdrop of something much larger. The officer takes one last long look at the Crescent Pack before retreating to his cruiser, his partner following without question. The red and blue lights fade once more into the quiet of Red Hollow's far edges. The weight of the night lingers long after their retreat. One by one, the Crescent Pack mount their bikes, the deep growl of their engines sparking life into the restless air. For the first time tonight, they appear ready to leave. Not victorious, but resolute. There are no cheers from the crowd, no final declarations of change. Only the faint echoes of tension remain, bridging what was and what could be. As the Crescent Pack begins to ride off, Sophie takes a single step forward, her small frame unmoving. Her mother's hand hovers near her shoulder protectively, but the child doesn't budge, her wide eyes fixed on the figures who had stood so firmly against injustice. "Thank you," she murmurs, her small voice carried away on the night wind. For a fleeting moment, Ryder tilts his head just slightly, a faint acknowledgement of the gratitude carried from a place far too profound for a town like this. The Crescent Pack roars off into the night, their figures swallowed by the distance, their presence in Red Hollow momentarily gone, but never forgotten. And behind them, the townsfolk watch, their minds heavy with the echo of decisions yet to be made, legacies yet to be forged, and battles yet to come.